two immediate impacts. One was just the influx of refugees, people from New Orleans that didn't have a place to go. Between the Civic Center and Burton Coliseum and the responsibilities that were placed on local government to be able to provide for those folks was huge. I can't say I don't think we were ill prepared for that, but I don't know how you do fully prepare for that. I mean, the parish set up what we called a informal Walmart out at the Burton Coliseum Livestock Barn. We had shelving, we had supplies that were being contributed from all different sources for the people that were housed there, as well as others housed in other locations around the parish. It was an incredible. It looked like a Walmart in a livestock barn is what it looked like. I mean, everything from baby diapers to food and all other kind of supplies. The second immediate impact was when Rita hit. I think we ended up doing a really good job of preparing for that storm, responding to that storm, and then recovering from that storm. But I got to tell you, we had a blueprint of what not to do that was very fresh on everybody's minds. All we had to do was watch CNN, Fox News, and others about what was going on in New Orleans, and what a perfect blueprint of what not to do and how not to respond. And so I think we were really helped by their misfortune. And I think that had a lot to do with some of the successes that we enjoyed. Part of it, too, was I just think we had a better system of government than they did. We had a much more cohesive set of officials who were more interested in working together to do good things than they were working separately to try to accomplish something. And that had a huge impact on our ability, I think, to respond. One person in particular I want to give some credit to with regard to the preparation for that is the then superintendent of schools, Jude Terrio. When the officials came together to try to here we are in the middle of that week. I think, as my recollection is, the storm hit on a Friday night, Saturday morning. Earlier in that week, when it was really uncertain as to whether or not we were going to get this thing. We're sitting here with, at the time, several thousand evacuees housed in various places here, primarily Civic Center and Burton Coliseum, but they were in churches and other places. At a time that was well earlier than maybe any of us were comfortable with ordering some kind of evacuation, we realized that not only were we going to have to be concerned about our own people getting out of here, but we had this huge amount of people from elsewhere that had no access to get anywhere either. Well, when the officials came together, there was some reluctance on some officials' part about, well, God, if we cry wolf, you always worry about ordering evacuation too early, because if the thing turns and goes somewhere else, you've ordered this evacuation, everybody's left home, they boarded windows and everything, and the sun's shining the day the storm's supposed to hit, and everybody's going, what were y'all thinking? Well, it's not an exact science, as we all know. The key component to that was the school system. If you're going to close schools, you get people's attention. If you don't close schools, you got all kind of problems about what to do about the kids, the parents can't get off work and all this kind of stuff. Well, Jude, to his credit, at a time when perhaps a lesser man might have been a little worried about the political fallout from deciding to close the schools, agreed to close the schools. And my recollection is that he was going to close them on Wednesday, which was well early compared to, and the whole basis for that was needing the school buses. Not so much that people need to get out of here on Wednesday, but we needed the school buses to transport the evacuees that were in place here and get them out of here, get the buses back in time to move other people out. That was a huge decision, and it paid off. I mean, there was a risk to him politically, because if you close schools unnecessarily, then moms and dads that have jobs that are going to have to be off their job because they don't have anything to do with their children that are home from school when typically they would have been at school. You create all kind of problems with daycare and all these other kind of things. So there was a risk for him politically. And I've always wanted to acknowledge and express appreciation to him for making that decision at a time that carried some risk with it. But I think that was the key component as far as the preparation of the storm. There's another individual that in terms of the response and recovery in the immediate aftermath of the storm that really deserves acknowledgement, and that's a private citizen, Glenn Pompelli. Glenn, Pompelli Oil Company was our savior in terms of being able to have fuel access for us. And Glenn himself, the owner, president, CEO of the company, was out there pumping fuel. I mean, he was, in fact, he told me a story one time that he, at the point that the winds were still kicking up pretty good, he was traveling in his SUV over the I-210 bridge in a complete ghost town type of environment. No one else on the road, no one anywhere, lights not on, power's off. And he said, I got about a third of the way up the bridge and I realized that if something happened and I went off this bridge, he said, nobody knew where I was, nobody knew I was here, nobody knew what I was doing, I couldn't communicate with anybody, and I may just be lost forever. And it was really true, but that's his commitment to primarily to the government agencies, the Sheriff's Department, the Police Jury, and City, and others, to make sure that fuel was available for us at a time when, we all had large storage tanks, but we were going through it pretty good. And he was definitely a hero during the immediate recovery period there. For all that we kind of hem and haw about sometimes between agencies, most of that just went awry. And what little bit of that maybe contentiousness that was still there was very short-lived. The night right just before the storm, Mitch Landrieu came in. He was the sitting lieutenant governor at the time, and he came in. He didn't come in with an entourage. He didn't come in with photographers or major staff or anything like that. He came in his jeans with his sleeves rolled up and began immediately helping secure planes to get some of our infirmed out of here that we, frankly, had he not done that, I don't know what we'd have done because we'd have had a hard time. And he was able to utilize his sister, the senator, her influence to be able to get some. I think we had some Army and Air Force planes out of New Mexico and Arizona, I think, that were coming in here to move people out. So he was able to really do a great job for us. There were long hours during the immediate part of the recovery. Power, of course, was off. I guess looking back on it, if we had had better generator capacity at the time, we have learned since then, obviously, and there's been a lot of improvements from that, but it was hot. And for those of us that were around here trying to sleep in offices and everything with windows that would not open and 90-degree temperatures and higher inside these offices, I know we had some fans hooked up to a smaller generator, and all they were doing was blowing hot air. It was kind of like you just soon turn the fan off. But I remember things like Don Dixon, and his night goggles and the helicopters that were flying over looking for looters and things, and his statements at the press conferences that I'm going to tell you in Calcasieu Parish, we own the night. There were some moments there that I hope all those are documented because they really, and a lot of those things ended up being the precursors to improvements that we made, one of which y'all were certainly involved in, you personally as well as your staff, to be able to move from that where we were trying to get information out as best we could to ultimately in future storms having streaming video where people that were away from here, unfortunately for us, the only thing that was being reported to people after Rita was Katrina. I know my wife and family were in Memphis, and we would have to be able to try to communicate by cell phone to let them know what was happening here, because all they could see on the national networks was New Orleans. And it was like we talked about a Rita amnesia, where there was almost a Rita ignoring going on when we were dealing with what we were dealing with, because all the eyes of national media were focused down there. Well, y'all were able to rectify that by putting in a streaming video type thing where people could, on their computer, regardless of where they were, get press briefings that we were holding during Gustav, and it was a huge improvement. There were other improvements as well that came from our learning process from Rita. But overall, I think we, particularly being judged in relation to the way things took place down in the southeast part of the state, I think we were judged very favorably. We kind of did that in Rita, but it was by the seat of our pants. I mean, we decided that even though the police jury was clearly the responsible party under state law, that there was a major stake in whatever we did and didn't do for these municipalities, all of whom had elected mayors, and the sheriff's department, who had a huge stake in making sure things went right. So we kind of informally would pull those people together in the aftermath, not only in the preparation for the storm and in the response to the storm, but in the aftermath of that, pulling these folks together to decide everything from when should we mandate evacuation, what should we do with curfews, how should they be put in place, what should be the times for that, how should we decide on when people can return. I mean, here we were without power for days on end, and without power we were not able to assure, some of the cities didn't even have public water available. Sulphur did, but some of the other cities did not. So to allow people to come back in during that period of time at a point where we could not provide for their basic services, sewerage, water, whatever, would have been really a bad deal for everybody, particularly those people coming back, but also for the public officials trying to spend their time restoring those kinds of services. So I think that everybody pulled together, and that group was the one that would make those decisions. Now, there wasn't a official format for them to do that, but nobody was pointing to the officialness at that time. Everybody was saying, let's do this because it's the right thing to do. Well, subsequent to that, we were able to form and have all the governing bodies approve being part of an executive policy group, which basically consisted of the president of the police jury, the 6 mayors of the municipalities in the parish, and the sheriff, with the parish administrator and superintendent of schools being ad hoc resource persons to that. And I think that served us very well in the subsequent storms, and will continue to in the future, because it's got the decision makers and policy makers all in one room. And the old deal about more heads are better than one, I think, is an altruism that works. You know, particularly when you're talking about the evacuation thing, there is such a political risk to that no one wants to be in the position of crying wolf and then having to suffer the consequences. Not so much, well, someone might be worried about it politically, but you worry about it in a longer term sense of like, well, if we told them to leave and nothing happened, next time we tell them to leave, they're going to be less prone to observe that warning. So we got to be really careful about that. Well, spreading that kind of a decision amongst that chief elected official group was a way to build comfort in each one of them that they weren't going to have to bear that alone. And not only did it help the conversation and the discussion by getting more heads involved, but it also spread the potential blame, if you will. And you hate to even think that people would do that. These people have a great responsibility when they start talking about mandating evacuation and all the problems that go with that. We had people calling about how they wanted a mandatory evacuation, because if they didn't have a mandatory evacuation, they were worried their insurance wouldn't pay if they left, or their employer wouldn't let them off. And so you had all of those things wrapped up into that, and that group, I think, made very credible decisions. Gustav was a tough one, because except for that little minute jog that the storm made when it was south of Lafayette, we were in harm's way. That one little jog moved it further north, and as it resulted, I think only the eastern part of the parish really got any winds worth talking about. Everybody else was okay. But when you started looking at the similarities between what Rita did and what Gustav looked like it was going to do, what Ike ultimately did, you start building an experience level that most of us had not had. Fortunately, I mean, Audrey in 1957 was kind of the closest. That was the worst that we had gotten for 50 years, and so Rita was a real wake up call for everybody. But I think that policy group really is one of the major components that came out of the experience of Rita that will serve this community for many years to come.